Much, President. I have to say I found this discussion quite depressing. Its tone has been largely arrogant and neo-colonial. And it's interesting that even Biden, at his recent meeting with Xi at the G20, made the point that he doesn't seek a new Cold War with China. He's no intention of having a conflict with China. He doesn't want to contain China, and that the US is committed to the one China policy and doesn't seek to use Taiwan as a tool. Now, obviously, none of this can be taken at face value. He's not exactly the most reliable statesman, but it must be remarked upon. And interestingly, it is radically less hawkish than some of the nonsense coming out of this chamber earlier in the discussion and over the last number of years. And given that many of you have been sucking up to Washington, ramping up your anti-Chinese rhetoric and doing your best to sabotage EU ties with China, our largest trading partner, shooting ourselves in the foot, you might want to take note. Rather than starting fires and burning bridges, we should recognise we have serious common challenges. We must engage, we must have dialogue, we must have cooperation and mutual respect. Mr. President, of course the people of Iran have a right to push for change in their own country, and violent crackdown against them is wrong. But the conversation in here is always about what we should do rather than what we shouldn't do and what we should undo. Because look at where that attitude has got us. Hardliners here have nurtured hardliners there. These protests are organic and legitimate. I don't believe they're a Western plot, but I also don't doubt that there are some bad faith actors, and that shouldn't surprise us. There are also deep-seated reasons why Iran, a country under existential threat, is hyper-vigilant about threats to its sovereignty. But nothing the West is doing is helping that situation. Biden vying, we're going to free Iran, is not helping any Iranian. It's the worst possible thing to say. It's directly putting civilians in the firing line and hyping the external threat narrative. How have sanctions helped? They've created widespread misery, and crackdown has gotten harder. Draw the conclusion this isn't working. So what can we do? Relieve the pressure, drop the sanctions, pursue dialogue, not regime change. Get it into your head. Iranians are protesting not for EU strategic interests. They're protesting for their own future. It should be left to them to decide it.
Thank you, Ms Clare.
The main agents of instability in the so-called Middle East are Europe and its overgrown colony in North America. Since the Crusades, people there have every reason to be sick of the sight of us. Britain and France built instability into the region when Sykes and Picot drew its borders. It was Britain that planted the seeds of Israel's apartheid regime in Palestine, divide and rule, just as they did in Ireland, and the West never had any qualms about backing dictators as long as they protected our interests. So how did overthrowing Mossadegh promote stability? Was the Iran-Iraq war good for security? Did backing the Mujahideen cover us in glory? Every so-called Western intervention, the occupation of Iraq, the disaster of Afghanistan, the NATO bombing of Libya, the backing of Islamist extremism in Syria, Saudi's genocidal assault on Yemen, all produce seismic waves of instability that tremor down for decades, leaving broken countries, hobbled economies, violence, trauma and permanent conflict. And at the end of that, we stroke our chins, pretend we've nothing to do about it and ask how we are going to promote stability in the region. You have got to be joking.